Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're embarking on what is essentially a microscopic detective story. We are going on a hunt for an invisible enemy that is, right this second, silently destroying the reliability of your systems. We're talking about micro-latency spikes. You know, those tiny, fleeting moments of delay that completely ruin real-time performance, yet somehow remain totally hidden from your standard monitoring tools. We're going to decode this invisible tax of context switching and latency jitter, and I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to see your server architecture in a completely different light.
So think about this for a second. Is your so-called stable system suddenly suffering from these unexplained lag spikes? I mean, you've checked the logs, you've optimized your algorithms over and over, and you're practically pulling your hair out because everything looks absolutely fine on paper. Well, I've got some news for you. The culprit? It's not your code logic. Your code is probably fantastic. The real issue is the hidden impact of context switching, which is just silently destroying your microlatency down at the absolute hardware level. Now, what's really interesting about this is that a nice, smooth 90% CPU utilization is actually a complete illusion. Seriously, your CPU usage graphs are lying to you. On modern dashboards, hitting a perfectly stable 90% or even a breezy 40% utilization is just a deceptive vanity metric. Sure, it looks great to management, but it actively hides the granular, nanosecond-level execution gaps that are literally tearing your performance apart behind the scenes. And here's exactly why that happens. Metrics like average throughput act as a massive smoothing filter. It's kind of like looking at a deeply potholed bumpy road through a blurry lens. It looks perfectly flat, right? But in highly sensitive environments like high-frequency trading or competitive online gaming, that blurry lens is masking severe micro-stuttering. We really have to transition our focus away from these macroscopic, visible load metrics and start looking at the invisible movement of data that occurs every single time a thread hits pause. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, Anatomy of a Context Switch. Let's zoom past the user interface and get right down to the silicon level. What actually happens when your system decides it needs to multitask? A context switch isn't just some simple, clean move. It's a violent interruption. Look at the mechanical cost here. First, the kernel has to swap the active task. Second, it has to save all the CPU registers. Third, it flushes the state. And fourth, it frequently results in thread migration. That's where a process is ripped away and moved to an entirely different cold core with a completely empty cache. It's basically an interrupt storm that triggers catastrophic cache misses. Which brings us to this absolutely crucial reality. During a context switch, your system stops doing productive work just to perform housekeeping. It's literally hitting the pause button on executing your highly optimized code just to shuffle papers around. If your system is doing this tens of thousands of times a second, man, that hardware-level interruption turns into a massive hidden latency penalty. Section 2, Measuring the Invisible Tax. So, if our standard tools are lying to us and smoothing out all the bumps, how on earth do we catch the silent killer in the act? We need to shift from the scene of the crime to our forensic tools. And this is exactly where eBPF comes in, the extended Berkeley packet filter. Think of eBPF as our microscopic blacklight. By using these modern 2026 tracing tools, we can finally bypass the noise, dive deep into the kernel, and capture the exact nanosecond-level jitter that standard profilers are completely blind to. It lets us map out those invisible execution gaps in real time. And this brilliantly illustrates the direct correlation we find when we turn that black light on. When you map interrupt rates against tail latency in distributed systems, we see something wild. As the kernel interrupts execution to juggle threads, the tail latency doesn't just creep up slowly. No, it experiences a sudden, catastrophic expansion. This exact moment is when your users are feeling that dreaded lag spike. But wait, it gets even wilder. Real-time trace data reveals the absolute massive blast radius of these events. A single noisy neighbor process, we're talking about just one errant thread getting swapped around, can invalidate the L3 cache for an entire NUMA node. It's not just slowing itself down, it is actively destroying the memory architecture efficiency for everything else sharing that silicon. Just poof, gone. Section 3, the throughput versus latency paradox. So why are our systems inadvertently self-sabotaging like this? Well, we've always been told to optimize for maximum requests per second, right? But compare a steady stream of continuous execution against a bursty pipeline that's fragmented by preemptive context switches. By pushing for absolute maximum throughput, we inadvertently force the scheduler to rapidly slice up CPU time. This creates a highly fragmented execution pipeline that ultimately just falls apart under pressure. So, the crucial point is this. High throughput is often just a mask for a degrading system.
You might be processing a million requests a second, sure, but if the context switching required to achieve that creates micro-stutters that ruin the real-time experience of your users, well, then your high throughput metric is actually a symptom of a failing architecture.
Section 4, Engineering for Deterministic Flow. Let's move to and see how this builds our defense. Identifying the problem is only half the battle, right? Now we need to secure the perimeter and enact the architectural shifts required to actually maintain a continuous execution flow. To stop the operating system from playing musical chairs with your critical tasks, we basically need 3 major changes. First, CPU pinning and isolation. Explicitly telling the scheduler, hey, these cores are off limits for general tasks, which keeps your critical threads locked in place. Second, user space networking. And third, utilizing bypass kernels. By bypassing the kernel entirely for networking and system calls, we completely eliminate the overhead of traditional syscalls. You are essentially taking the steering wheel back from the operating system. When you reclaim control over thread locality, ensuring that the data and the processing stay exactly where they belong, you transform what used to be a jittery, unpredictable system into a highly reliable, real-time engine. Which leaves us with one ultimate, provocative question to reflect on regarding your own systems. Look at the metrics you rely on every single day and ask yourself, are you optimizing for the dashboard? Just making sure that vanity 90% CPU line looks perfectly smooth to your boss? Or are you optimizing for the data, ensuring that every single byte flows continuously without paying the invisible tax of a context switch? I think it's time to stop letting your metrics lie to you. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.